On behalf of the City of Glendale, the Library Arts and Culture Department, thank you for joining us today and coming together at this, our central library, for this exciting event. I love learning about Glendale's history as well as I'm not a Glendalian by birth. I'm from the East Coast, but it's not every day that we get to hear firsthand accounts of what life was like in the early days of our great city. Mr. Paul Ignatius, I'm happy that you're here to share your stories and experiences with all of us. And what a tribute to you that so many have traveled from so far, far and wide, to be here to honor you. And that speaks volumes about your importance and your legacy. So thank you so much for being here, for everyone that has traveled this far to be here as well. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Ignatius' family was one of the first Armenian families to put down roots here in Glendale and build their lives here in our city. This was a start that blossomed to become the richly diverse city that we are today, home to the largest Armenian community outside of Yerevan. We owe gratitude and respect to these families who were among the first to establish Glendale as a destination for Armenian immigrants looking for a new home in America. Mr. Ignatius was not able to join us in 2020 when the City Council initially proclaimed November 11th as Paul Ignatius Day, so I'm honored to present you today with the official proclamation. And so I'm going to read it for you, and this will give you, those of you who don't know, and I don't suppose there are many of you in this room, don't know of all of his accomplishments. But for those of you that don't, this is the proclamation, and I shall read. Whereas Paul Robert Ignatius was born in Glendale, California on November 11th, 1920. Mr. Ignatius attended Hoover High School, where he served as a student body president in 1938. Mr. Ignatius graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Southern California before joining the United States Navy during World War II and serving in combat as an ordnance officer. Then Mr. Ignatius returned to school to obtain his master's in business administration from Harvard Business School. He later served as Assistant Secretary of the United States Army, Undersecretary of the United States Army, Assistant Secretary of Defense, and then Secretary of the United States Navy under President Lyndon Johnson. Mr. Ignatius also served as both President and Executive Vice President of the Washington Post newspaper. The United States Navy, and this is amazing, the United States Navy in 2019 commissioned the 67th Arleigh Burke-class destroyer ship, USS Paul Ignatius, for Mr. Paul Ignatius. And Mr. Ignatius has provided decades of exceptional service as a public administrator for our community and for our entire United States of America. So therefore, I, Paula Devine, Mayor of the City of Glendale, do hereby proclaim November 11th as Paul Ignatius Day in Glendale and ask the community to honor Robert Paul Ignatius' legacy on this day and for decades to follow.
So I thank you all for coming, and let me say it's been, it's been 80 years since I've lived in Glendale, but I carry with me always the fondest memories of my time here in the 1920s and 1930s. I have just the happiest recollections of those years here. And I think I'm particularly grateful to the schools. I can't tell you how much I appreciated the public schooling at Hoover High School, Eleanor Toll, Mark Keppel, Eugene Field. Talk about some of my teachers. a little bit later. So what I'm going to ask you to do is think back with me in the old days a little bit. When you get an old guy like me, you tend to look back a little bit nostalgically, but maybe some of what I have to say has some relevance to our situations today. Now I'm going to see if I can handle all this technology here. This is how my family began in Glendale. That's my grandfather, Abadis Matios Jamgochin. His rather regal-looking wife, if I may say so, her name was Akabi. They grew up in what was historic Armenia. My grandfather went to Euphrates College in Earhart. He spoke English and translated a lot of British poetry into Armenian, and he wrote some poetry of his own with some words like freedom and liberty, and he got into real trouble with the Ottoman authorities. And the family packed him off to Manchester, England, which was the center of the British cotton industry. And his family were distributed throughout the Ottoman Empire, distributors of Manchester cotton, so they had a lot of connections and friends there. And he went with my mother, Elisa, and her very, very younger brother, Matthew, and lived in England for, 20, 22 or 3 years, became a British subject, actually, in 1909, and everything was fine except the weather, which was disagreeable for him. And when he knew about Southern California and the orange trees and the sunshine, he decided to pack up everybody. And when I mean packing up, he packed up my mother's piano, he packed up a billiard table, he packed up furniture. He was told you couldn't find much in California, he was told. And they came over on the Lusitania, traveled across the country, and he bought land in a place called Tropico, which is just down near San Fernando Road. It was a rural area. I think they grew strawberries and other things. It was incorporated into the city of Glendale around 1919, thereabouts. And he built a wonderful house. I think we've got a picture of that house. Isn't that a nice place? And next to it was a tennis court, and that's my mother, Elisa. You think Nike could sell that tennis dress today? I must say it was a little bit more modest, wasn't it, in those days? And notice that wooden tennis racket. She was a pianist. She went to the School of Music at the University of Southern California. This is Tropico, I guess, in the old days, 1910. You can see it's quite rural, and not today, though. These are a map of the boundaries of Tropico. This is Edward Weston, one of the most distinguished citizens of Glendale. He lived in Tropico, very near where my grandfather lived. My mother gave him one of his first exhibits when he was a young man, but he became one of the great photographic artists of the 20th century, along with Ansel Adams, Edward Steitch, and one or two others. There are several books about him. One book that was published by the Boston Museum of Fine Arts is about Edward Weston's time in Tropico. It may be that Gary has that in your library here, I don't know. When my uncle married his bride, my Aunt Eugenie, Edward Weston made the wedding picture, so that's kind of a nice family archive to have. This is Weston's studio somewhere in Tropico. It's not going to win any architectural award, but he was a remarkably artistic photographer. His work is just something wonderful to look at. Los Feliz in San Fernando, this is sort of where, near Tropico, My Uncle Matthew lived at the end. Los Feliz terminates at Glendale Avenue, I think, and then there's a short block called Road's End. And my Uncle Matthew had a house there, and he had a tennis court also. Why am I showing Nibley Park? Sad to say, that beautiful house in Tropico that I showed you burned down in 1927 when the family was away on vacation. And my grandfather bought a new house in the Rossmoyne area in a kind of hilly place just above Nibley Park. In fact, you could walk down a series of terraces from my grandfather's house on Rossmoyne Avenue directly to Nibley Park, and my uncles played there, and I used to play there as a boy on occasion. This is again at Nibley Park with my brother Joe. I'll talk a little bit about Joe a little bit later. That's my mother Elisa and my father. I won't tell you who that kid with all the hair is. Those were the days. I think I must have been about 3 years old or so. My father came to this country in 1903. He, like my grandfather, had gone to Euphrates College. He came to this country and went to a business college in New York, and then went to West Virginia and was manager of a glass factory there, and he joined the Shriners and made a trip to Southern California, and happened to meet my grandfather and his daughter Elisa, and he decided that California was the place where he wanted to be, and he packed up everything and moved out here and went to work initially for a man named Mr. Enfiagion, who was an early rug dealer somewhere, and then before too long founded his own business and profited quite well during the 1920s, but like a lot of people, lost much of what he had in the 1929 stock crash. My sister once told my father that he was lucky to have come to America, and my father broke into a big smile and said, "America is lucky to have me." He was kind of a leader, I think it's fair to say, of the Armenian community in Southern California. He and my mother started something called the Armenian Allied Arts Association, and he helped to get established that home for elderly people with a museum attached out in the San Fernando Valley. And my grandmother's beautiful wedding gown with gold thread made just for her marriage in the old country we donated to that museum. It's on exhibit. It's really quite beautiful. This is this high school, which is where the library now is, isn't it? Am I right, Gary? And that's the Glendale High School. I'll talk a little bit about Glendale, but one of the things I want to say is that some really remarkable athletes came particularly from Glendale High School. This is Frank Wyckoff, who was called the world's fastest human. He won the 100-yard dash in the 1932 Olympics, which were held in the Los Angeles Coliseum. 9.4 was the time. They measured in yards then, they measure in meters now. But that's Frank Wyckoff. He later went to Carpinteria, I think, where he was a teacher and coach. But he was one of the great athletes of this city of Glendale. This is Ted Schroeder, who was national champion, Wimbledon champion, good friend of mine. He and I played on the USC freshman tennis team. He was number 1, and I was the last at number 8. But Ted was a great player, had all the advantages of training at the Los Angeles Tennis Club with Perry T. Jones and getting equipment and practice. He was a great player. And his most memorable match, in my opinion, was this young man named Pancho Gonzalez, who grew up in public courts at Exposition Park and other places, kind of taught himself while Ted had all of the advantages of the LA Tennis Club. And in a thrilling 5-set match for the United States Championships in 1949, Gonzalez beat Schroeder. And while I was somewhat unhappy because Ted was my friend, I thought it was a great thing for tennis. Here's someone who grew up on the public parks, and it helped to shed that atmosphere of white flannels and country club atmosphere and all that stuff of the game of tennis. So we owe a lot to Pancho Gonzalez. Here's another athlete from Hoover High School this time, who became a renowned surgeon in Palo Alto, played tennis at Hoover and in college, but blossomed as a senior player and won 8 national championships in 2 amazing victories over the legendary Bobby Riggs, who has been the Wimbledon and the U.S. champion. And I'm happy to say it's my younger brother, Dr. Joe Ignatius. That's he beat me when I was older than him, and then later when my daughter started beating me, that was really even harder to take. But tennis has been a big thing in our family. Sarah was the #1 junior player in Washington, #2 in the Atlantic States. Joe, as I said, had a number of national championships. This is Frankie Albert from Glendale High School. Number 13 was the jersey he wore. He was president of the student body as well as a top athlete. And he went to Stanford, and the modern game of football was patterned after Frankie Albert. His coach at Stanford, Clark Shaughnessy, saw great talent in Albert, and before then, the ball was hiked by the center back to the quarterback. But Shaughnessy, working with Albert, changed the game to what was called the T formation, where the quarterback bent over the center, and the center handed the ball to the quarterback. And that's how modern football is played today, and it began with Frankie Albert at Stanford, and then later he quarterbacked the 49ers, another product of Glendale High School. Now, why is Jackie Robinson here? He didn't go to Hoover, didn't go to Glendale, but he came to a track meet at Hoover sometime 1937, somewhere around there. He went to Muir Tech in the Pasadena area. And the school put a number of us to work helping out. I was measuring the broad jump. Jackie won the 100-yard dash. Other jumpers had taken their jumps at the pit, and Robinson walked over and took one mighty leap and landed 2.5 feet farther than anybody else. And as he started putting on his sweatsuit, he said to me, "Would you please tell me if anybody beats me, because I got to go run the 220. Well, so he ran the 220, won it. Then he ran the winning last lap of the relay, and went on to UCLA, played in all the major sports. And then, to his great credit and to Brent Fricke's credit of the Brooklyn Dodgers, he desegregated Major League Baseball. He became a star with the Brooklyn Dodgers. So that's why we've got here. He didn't go to one of our schools, but he came to a track meet at one of our schools. Great American. This is Hoover High School. Hoover started, I think, in the late 20s, and then there was the Long Beach earthquake in 32 or 33, and it did quite a lot of damage, particularly to the auditorium. We didn't have a use for the auditorium for several years while it was under repair. But that was my high school. I'll talk about that a little later. This is my sister, Helen Mary, who was always called Miggs. She, I have to say, was the most talented member of our family. She was a musician. She was a writer. She started out, spent a year at UCLA, and then transferred to Wellesley College. And You know, after 1 year there, she was elected to Phi Beta Kappa. Her best friend was a girl named Nancy Weiser, and when I went back to the Harvard Business School after the war, Meg said, "I think you'd like to meet one of the members of my class." So she introduced me to Nancy and then disappeared. And the following day, with some trepidation, she asked Nancy, "Well, what did you think of my brother?" And Nancy said, "He looked kind of old." And that was the beginning of a great romance that lasted, almost 73 years until Dan died 3 years ago. Many members of Meg's family are here today, and I'm glad they're able to join us. Now, Bob Wyan. During the Depression, Bob Wyan, a student at Glendale High School, took a course in cooking and then opened a six-stool diner on Colorado Boulevard, right near where we're seated today, and one day had a great vision. He said to himself, "Why don't I slice the bun in three?" And invented the double-decker hamburger. And he called it Bob's Big Boy. And Ray Kroc, who started McDonald's, and now billions of McDonald's hamburgers called Big Macs are sold throughout the world. And Ray Kroc has acknowledged publicly that the Big Mac is the son of Bob Wyan's Big Boy. So there's another great achievement, Mayor Devine, for your city of Glendale. Oh my goodness, that's me. That's a great head of hair, I must say. I was interested in acting, and this was a play called The Tavern at Hoover. That was my family's house. That's my father standing at the doorway on North Columbus Avenue, just north of Kenneth Road. And he bought that house in 1925, I think it was. We lived in rented houses before then. But the area had been an apricot orchard before, then was subdivided into lots for housing. And that's where my brother and sister and I grew up. Across the street, directly across the street, number 1521, was the Toll House. It was much bigger, much grander than the other houses in the area. Its owner, Charles Toll, was a banker. He had a chauffeur named Sherman who drove him to work in the morning and brought him back at night. And his wife, Eleanor J. Toll, was a community leader. And in her honor, the junior high school across the street from Hoover High School was named the Eleanor J. Toll School, and I had the privilege of going to that school. But it was a grand old house. It's still there. I think it's some kind of historic site in the city. Now, Grand Central Air Terminal, another first. This was the West Coast terminus for transcontinental flights. Grand Central was initiated, if I remember right, around 1929, and really quite a place. It was eventually succeeded by LAX in Inglewood and what had been bean fields, but we've got several pictures. Here's the airplane landing, another picture. There's an early transport plane. We were let out of school at Hoover to get to the airport one day when Charles Lindbergh and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, landed at Grand Central Airport. He was a national hero. He flown the Atlantic alone in 1927. And we were let out of school to be on hand to see him at the airport. At an earlier time, Amelia Earhart, the famous woman pilot, visited Glendale. And one day there was an interesting event. There was some daredevil glider pilot. I think his name was Hawley Bolus, if I remember right. And he was carried to a high altitude, released, and in his glider looped the loop 40 times before landing safely at Grand Central Airport, setting some kind of record, I'm sure. So Glendale can be proud of Grand Central Airport. There were a number of aviation-related companies there, and it played an important role in the development of American aviation. This is Amelia Earhart. I wasn't there that day, but I think that kind of airplane's called an autogyro. If anybody here is an expert on this, I think that's what they call that. I wasn't there that day, but the library found this quite remarkable photograph. She disappeared somewhere in the Pacific. We've never been just sure where or how, but she was really a heroic figure. Airplane. One of the reasons Grand Central was closed was because there were too many wires around, and we needed more open land. And as aviation grew in volume, the Federal Aviation Agency felt a new place was needed, and they moved to, this is a dirigible that landed at Grand Central Airport. Interesting things happen, like Holly Bullis I was talking about earlier. There'd be big events there. This is Brandon Broadway. That's a big bank there on the corner. Directly across the street on Broadway was Leffler's Barber Shop. And directly across Brand Boulevard, opposite the bank, was Cornwell and Kelty Hardware and Sporting Goods store, run by the family of a Hoover High School classmate of mine named Glenn Cornwell. You can see that's a streetcar coming down Grand Boulevard. We're going to look at some other pictures also. There's the streetcars again. This is Grand Boulevard in the 20s. That streetcar doesn't say Desire, it says Los Angeles. Went all the way down Brand Boulevard into Los Angeles. They called the big red cars Pacific Electric. There's another photo of it. The Glendale News Press was an afternoon paper, and really quite good. One of the things high school students liked about it was that they had a column called Campus Chatter that was all about budding romances at the school and athletic events and one thing another. And I'm not sure does the Glendale News Press still exist? It does, good, I'm glad to hear that. I didn't know that. But afternoon papers had a tough time when television came in. In Washington, the Washington Star was an excellent paper, but it couldn't compete as an afternoon daily and passed out. I don't know what that locomotive is doing here, but it's a wonderful picture that the library found. This is the Alexander Theater. It cost 40 cents to go there, so we couldn't go very often. I mean, you could go to the Roxy Theater for only 15 cents, or the Glendale Theater for 20. But this was the place where first-run features were shown. There were often previews of new, and the skies would be lit with searchlights when the movie stars came to Glendale, to the Alex Theater. Glendale City Hall. Oh, that's me as a naval officer in World War II. I was on this ship. This is the USS Manila Bay. You can't see Captain Lee. It says he's in the insert somewhere, but he was a great leader. He got the Navy Cross twice on our ship. These ships were built along the West Coast, many of them. Edgar Kaiser built some of them. And they carried what were called a composite squadron of fighters and torpedo bombers. And we were in a lot of action. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was the biggest naval engagement of World War II, and we narrowly escaped disaster there. And then 6 weeks or so later, this ship was struck by two Japanese suicide planes. One struck the bridge, the other dove through the flight deck and exploded in the hangar deck below, killed a lot of my shipmates and damaged a lot of our aircraft. But we were able to contain the fires, and we saved the ship. I got a lot of happy members of Captain Lee. He retired as a vice admiral in La Jolla, and I saw him in later life. And I'm sure the last thing that ever would have occurred to Captain Lee would that some young officer on a ship would end up as the Navy Secretary someday. But I asked him to stand, and it was one of the happiest moments of my life. This is Nancy cutting the wedding cake. I told you about how my sister had introduced us. We were married in Holyoke, Massachusetts. This is a photo from the New York Times. That's the civilian leadership of the Pentagon at the time. That's Bob McNamara in his shirt sleeves. Bob Anthony, that's Cyrus Vance on McNamara's right hand. He later became Secretary of State under Jimmy Carter, but was the deputy. Johnny Foster was the head of Defense Research and Engineering. That's me standing at the far right. Behind that huge desk is James Forrestal, photographed, the first Secretary of Defense. I spent 8 years in the Pentagon, as Mayor Devine mentioned earlier. Nan became acquainted with a lot of wonderful people in Washington. This is Barbara Bush, and before George Bush became president, Nan and Barbara used to carpool kids to school, and later when her husband became president of the United States, Mrs. Bush often asked Nan to come over to play tennis on the White House court. This is a dinner in honor of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. She's standing next to her husband, John, along with President George Bush, Nan at the left, and me at the right with Laura Bush. Nan and Sandra were very close friends, played tennis together several days a week. But Nan was of great help to Justice O'Connor when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she was really troubled about whether to undergo chemotherapy. Devastating, but maybe necessary measure. She was told that without it, her chances of survival were quite limited. She was afraid that it would affect her reasoning power somehow as a justice of the United States Supreme Court. But Nan had been through all of this herself, and she was of great help to Sandra. The Secretary of the Navy asked me over to lunch one day. It was 4 or 5 years ago, and we talked about this and that. And when the lunch was about over, he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to name a ship after you." I said, "What?" And he did, and that's Ray Mabus, the secretary with me, and that's Nan. He gave us all hats, as you can see. I think my son David is in that picture, and I think Sarah's in that. So that pretty much covers. Let me end where I began, telling you that I have the happiest memories of living as a young boy, growing up here, learning values in the schools that to help shape my life, with remarkable teachers at Hoover High School, Miss Gray, the art teacher, Mr. Brewster, the debate coach, Mr. Prill, the drama coach, Miss Pierce, the Latin teacher, who taught us, along with Julius Caesar and other things, how to sing Jingle Bells in Latin. Tineat, tintinabulum. Who says Latin is a dead language? So I'm ready for your questions if you have any.
You mentioned about your family, your father being a leader in the Armenian community. Having read your book, I know there were some parts you've talked in your book about how active and involved he was in helping Saroyan and Ruben Mamoulian.
Yeah.
I would like you, if you can, please elaborate on that.
Yeah, my parents had acquaintances with a lot of really wonderful people, our own extended family and many friends. And among them were Ruben Mamoulian's parents. His mother had been an actress in Tiflis in the old days. His father had been an officer in the Russian army, and later his name was Zakaria, and became a banker. And they used to come to our house quite often. William Saroyan came in 1933 after his first book, The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, was published, and my folks gave a party in his honor, and everybody was, thrilled to meet this brilliant young writer, and he couldn't stand it, and he came to me. I was about 13 years old, and he said, "Is there any place in this house where we could go and read the funny papers?" And we get out from all these fawning people. And so, yes, there was. There was a maid's room down the corridor from the kitchen, and we were reading the funny papers, and my father discovered us in there, and he dragged Willie back to the party. Another lesser-known writer than Saroyan was Leon Sermelian, who wrote, I think, one of the great books about the Armenian genocide, from the eye of a young boy who experienced just what it was like to be torn from his school and sent out on his own. And he was sort of like, Huck Finn or Tom Sawyer, acting on his own, learning new languages. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. I Ask You, Ladies and Gentlemen, is the title. He was a good friend among other reasons because he had a serious case of tuberculosis, and my father helped to finance his hospitalization. But Zaven was a remarkable. I wrote a small book some years ago about three Armenian writers, Saroyan, Sermelian, and the third was Michael Arlen. His name was Kuyumjan, but that was too big a mouthful for the British to swallow, and so he became known as Michael Arlen. But at one time, he was the highest paid writer in the world, a picture on Time magazine's cover, and he wrote a book called The Green Hat, and made into a movie with Greta Garbo. I got to know him in New York. He was a real dandy. I mean, he wore cutaway coats and ties with diamond stick pins, and he was a figure. So yes, and by the way, just if I may say how honored I am to have been able to participate in some of the founding events of this new great Armenian American Museum, of which Gary is the chairman. There's a big hole in the ground right now that's going to be a beautiful building in just a couple of years from now. And it's fortunate to be located right cheek by jowl with this great public library. So thank you for what you're doing. And the Armenians have survived some remarkably interesting and in some cases remarkably tragic events. But they're still around, and they're producing new generations of people. And this museum, I think, will do a lot to let people know that this old first Christian nation is still with us. It had innovated in many interesting ways way back then, with one of the first wineries, one of the first places that made leather footwear, a whole lot of things, struggling now in a landlocked small area to keep its head above water. But the library will do a lot to keep that memory alive. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for being with us today. Could you tell us a little bit about your first days at the White House, what it was like?
Well, I came in at the beginning of President Kennedy's administration, And one of the first times I was at the White House was in the Rose Garden at a reception for some visiting dignitary. And we've got a favorite photograph in our family where I'm telling President Kennedy what a great job I'm doing for him, and he's paying absolutely no attention to me and looking at my glorious wife, who's attired with white gloves and a hat and everything. So that would have been, I guess, probably the middle of 1961, 60. Later on, when President Johnson was president, he wanted his cabinet to meet to hear about a cost reduction program we had at the Pentagon. And McNamara wasn't able to go, and Vance's back was acting up on him, so he couldn't go. And at the last minute, I was drafted to make the presentation. And I took quickly a number of charts with me, and I'd get started talking, and I'd make a point, and all of a sudden, this great booming voice, "Do you all hear that?" He said. It was Johnson interrupting me, making my point better than I could have made it. He was a powerful man in person, rather boring, I thought, on television, but he was something when he was standing, 6 inches before you and saying how I need your vote and you're going to be famous if you vote for me on this. I mean, he was something. Any other questions?
So when you were in high school or even college and you wanted to take somebody out on a date, what were the best activities or places to go in Glendale?
I was interested in acting, and I'd been in school plays, and Mrs. Mamoulian told her son Ruben that if he ever had any small little parts for a boy in his movies, he ought to get me. And I was in 3 of his movies. If you blinked your eyes, you'd probably miss me because they weren't big parts. But the first was called Becky Sharp. It was the first Technicolor full-length movie. Miriam Hopkins was the star of it. And there'd been an earlier Technicolor movie, but it was a short subject called La Cucaracha with a Spanish dancer. Then the big full-length movie was Becky Sharp. And then I was in something called The Gay Desperado. Gay meant happy in those days. And it was about a opera star, Nino Martini, and I was a Mexican kid in it for a day. And then finally, a movie called High, Wide, and Handsome, where Randolph Scott is about to consummate his marriage with Irene Dunn, when a young kid standing outdoors in the rain says, "Mr. Cortlandt, Mr. Cortlandt," and the kid was me. And I was telling him to get out to the oil fields in Pennsylvania because some bad guys were taking over the claim. And Irene Dunn's father ran a small circus, and they got some elephants to attack some of these. You can see why the picture didn't make any money. But it had some great tunes in it. So that was the third. I saw Mamoulian in Boston when Oklahoma was trying out before it premiered in New York. It was called Away We Go originally. And they changed the name to Oklahoma when the new song, Oklahoma, was written. But that changed American musicals. Before Oklahoma, there'd be drama, and then the drama would stop and somebody'd sing a song. And Mamoulian integrated the music with the drama in ways that hadn't been done before. And he did this in Carousel. He made Queen Christina with Greta Garbo. But his triumph was Porgy and Bess. He originally directed Porgy, but then the musical opera, Porgy and Bess. And one interesting thing, here's this opera about American black folks growing up in South Carolina. and showing the diversity of our wonderful country. Here, the director is an Armenian background, Ruben Mamoulian. The composers are both of Jewish faith, George and Ira Gershwin. The scene designer was a Russian, and Alexander Smolins from, I think, St. Petersburg, I think, was the conductor. So you had this ethnic diversity around an American theme, and it's sort of what this country's all about how from many we are one, and we shouldn't forget that.
Given your Armenian ancestry, what was, during your extensive military career, was there anything that you can think of that influenced your experiences during your military career?
I don't think I can honestly say that my Armenian background influenced my work as a Defense Department official. I was influenced by loving parents, good teachers, wonderful education, and a lot of experience. One thing I didn't mention about Hoover High School, if we have one more minute, Gary, there were 3 of us from Hoover, Sterling Livingston, Harry Haig, and I, who went on to USC and then the Harvard Business School. And in June of 1950, we formed a management consulting firm called Harbridge House. And I did a lot of work on Defense Department issues, including the Polaris program, working at Lockheed in Sunnyvale, Aerojet, other places like that. And over a 10 or 11 year period, I gained a lot of experience and knowledge in national defense matters. And it was that experience that brought me into the Pentagon and President Kennedy's administration. So I'm proud of my Armenian heritage, and I'm grateful for all of the experiences that I've had, including a trip to Armenia with 2 of my children. I can't say that Armenian per se and in any way directly influenced me. Well, thank you.
We have a small token of thanks for you being here today and something to take home. So we crafted a sign to honor you. It's so we have our 101 sign, to your little piece of California to take back to Washington with you. It says Glendale, California, your name, and it actually has your ship on it, the U.S. Paul Ignatius. So anyway, so we'll get a picture of that. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here today.